The quantum resonance scanner on the Galactic Concordance flagship Celestial Horizon screamed with impossible readings. Captain Elena Rodriguez felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up as the holographic display flickered with data points that defied every known principle of interstellar physics. "Confirm visual," she barked, her voice steady despite the rising tension on the bridge. Lieutenant Krell, a Zornaxian sensor specialist whose multiple eyes could process visual information across 17 spectrums, tapped a complex sequence of bioluminescent controls. His tentacle-like appendages moved with practiced precision, each movement sending ripples of bioluminescent code across his communication implants. The main view screen resolved, revealing a vessel that looked simultaneously ancient and impossibly advanced. The U.S. Curiosity didn't conform to any known starship design in the Galactic Concordance's extensive database. Its hull seemed to shimmer and shift, as if the very molecular structure was in constant, subtle motion. "Quantum entanglement detected," reported Ensign Maria Takahashi, her voice a mixture of scientific fascination and growing unease. "The ship's hull is exhibiting quantum state fluctuations that shouldn't be possible. It's like the vessel is breathing." Captain Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Breathing was a biological term, not something one would associate with a starship. Yet the description felt uncomfortably accurate. The Zornaxian communication specialist, a lanky being named Vorlex, attempted to establish first contact. His translation matrix, capable of processing over 10,000 linguistic patterns, struggled to penetrate the human vessel's communication barriers. "Unidentified vessel," Vorlex translated through the ship's universal communication array. "You have entered a regulated space corridor. State your designation and purpose." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, a response crackled through. Not in the formal diplomatic language expected by the Concordance, but in something far more casual. "Oh, hi there." The voice belonged to a woman who sounded like she was more concerned with her morning coffee than an interstellar encounter. "We're just doing a bit of research. Mind if we pass through?" Vorlex's communication implants nearly short-circuited. The response violated every known first contact protocol. It was too informal, too human. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "Run a full spectrum analysis," she commanded. "I want to know everything about that ship." The sensor screens erupted with data, impossible data. The human vessel's energy signatures defied comprehension. Its defensive capabilities seemed to be generated not by traditional shielding, but by something far more complex. The ship's systems appeared to be learning, adapting in real time to the Concordance vessel's probing scans. "Energy distribution is nonlinear," Ensign Takahashi reported, her voice rising with scientific excitement. "The power generation doesn't follow any known quantum mechanical model. It's like the ship is thinking." Lieutenant Krell's multiple eyes blinked in rapid succession, a Zornaxian gesture of extreme confusion. "Impossible," he muttered, though the data clearly suggested otherwise. A secondary scan revealed something even more perplexing. The human vessel carried what appeared to be a research team of just 12 individuals. 12 humans who, by all appearances, seemed completely unaware that they were operating a vessel capable of technological miracles. "Captain," Vorlex interrupted, "we're receiving a secondary transmission. It appears to be a recipe." Rodriguez looked up sharply. "A what?" The communication screen filled with detailed instructions for making something called chocolate chip cookies, complete with helpful annotations about butter temperature and mixing techniques. Embedded within the recipe was a casual invitation to share the results if the Concordance crew was interested. The bridge fell into a stunned silence. Dr. Jackson Cole, the lead researcher on the U.S. Curiosity, continued to sip his coffee, completely oblivious to the existential questions his ship was generating. Through the view screen, he gave a casual wave, more a gesture of friendly acknowledgement than a formal diplomatic greeting. "Humans," Lieutenant Krell whispered, a mixture of fear and reluctant admiration in his voice, "are not what we expected." Captain Rodriguez said nothing. Her eyes remained fixed on the impossible vessel, understanding that this moment marked something far more significant than a simple first contact. This was the beginning of something profound, a realization that would reshape everything the Galactic Concordance thought they knew about technological potential and the nature of intelligence itself. The diplomatic reception chamber of the Concordance Nexus Hall was a masterpiece of alien architecture. Crystalline walls that shifted with holographic data streams, gravity modulators that allowed multiple species to coexist comfortably, and acoustic dampeners that translated thought patterns into comprehensible communication. Dr. Jack Thompson looked completely out of place. His rumpled khaki jacket bore what appeared to be coffee stains, and his laptop bag, a decidedly primitive piece of technology by galactic standards, hung carelessly from one shoulder. Ambassador Xinra of the Crystalline Collectives found herself simultaneously repulsed and fascinated by the human representative. "Mr. Thompson," Xinra began, her translucent body shifting colors to indicate diplomatic formality, "the Galactic Concordance requires a comprehensive explanation of your vessel's technological capabilities." Thompson took a long sip from a travel mug that seemed to be his constant companion. "Sure," he said, pulling out a somewhat crumpled notebook. "But first, would you like to hear about our cookie recipe? The one we sent earlier." The entire diplomatic chamber went silent. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reynolds, Thompson's diplomatic attaché, tried to suppress a smile. She understood the delicate dance they were performing, presenting humanity as both unassuming and strategically brilliant. Behind the scenes, classified reports told a different story. The U.S. Curiosity's initial scans had revealed technological capabilities that made the most advanced Concordance vessels look like children's toys. Quantum entanglement communication systems that could theoretically communicate across multiple dimensional planes, adaptive hull materials that could reconfigure at the molecular level, energy generation methods that seemed to pull power from the very fabric of space-time. But Thompson, he looked like he might fall asleep at any moment. "Our primary research mission," Thompson explained, drawing diagrams that seemed to make no sense to the alien diplomats, "involves studying quantum fluctuations in interstellar magnetic fields." He paused, added what appeared to be a stick figure, then continued. "It's basically like making the universe's most complicated chocolate chip cookie, but with physics instead of flour." Ambassador Xinra's communication implants worked overtime. The translation matrix struggled to make sense of the analogy, finally settling on a diplomatic approximation that lost all nuance. Intelligence reports from multiple Concordance agencies painted an increasingly contradictory picture of humanity. One file detailed a human military operation that had neutralized a significant regional conflict with minimal casualties. Another described a human research team that had developed a medical treatment capable of regenerating neural tissue, a breakthrough that could revolutionize healthcare for hundreds of species. Yet here was Dr. Thompson, who looked like he might need help finding his own shoes. "We're particularly interested in your research on interdimensional communication," pressed Admiral Krelax, a senior military strategist whose tentacular appendages betrayed his growing frustration. "Our preliminary analysis suggests your vessel possesses capabilities far beyond current scientific understanding." Thompson blinked. "Oh, that? It's just something we've been tinkering with." He pulled out a smartphone, another piece of technology that seemed laughably primitive, and showed a series of complex mathematical equations. "We think it might help us understand how particles communicate across different dimensional planes." The equations were breathtaking in their complexity. What looked like a simple diagram to human eyes represented computational models that would take Concordance scientists decades to fully comprehend. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds watched the interaction carefully. She knew the real communication was happening beneath the surface, a complex dance of technological posturing and strategic information exchange. "Interesting timing," Admiral Krelax probed, "considering the recent incursions by the machine civilization near the Orion cluster." Thompson looked up, suddenly very alert. The coffee mug was set down. His entire demeanor changed, from absent-minded researcher to someone who understood precisely the geopolitical implications of their conversation. "We're aware of the situation," he said, his voice now crisp and precise, "and we're prepared to offer assistance." The phrase hung in the air, laden with unspoken potential. What humanity was offering wasn't just technological support. It was a fundamental reimagining of conflict resolution, of technological development, of interspecies cooperation. Ambassador Xinhua realized, with a mixture of fear and reluctant admiration, that humans were not just another species to be categorized and understood. They were something entirely different, a wild card that could reshape the entire galactic paradigm. And Dr. Jack Thompson? He had already returned to his coffee and was doodling what appeared to be a complex quantum equation, or possibly a recipe for banana bread. The Galactic Scientific Convergence was the most prestigious academic gathering in known space. Held within the massive spherical complex of the Quantum Research Institute, it had been the pinnacle of scientific exchange for over 3 centuries. Delegates from 2,000 different species gathered to share breakthrough research, computational models, and technological innovations. Dr. Emily Martinez adjusted her presentation hologram, completely unaware that she was about to fundamentally reshape everything these assembled scientists believed about technological development. The conference hall was a marvel of engineering. Gravitational fields allowed each species to exist in their optimal environmental conditions. Translation matrices hummed with millions of linguistic algorithms. Holographic displays shimmered with complex data streams that represented centuries of accumulated scientific knowledge. And Dr. Martinez was about to turn it all upside down. Her presentation began simply enough. A standard computational model, seemingly unremarkable. But as she progressed, the assembled scientists began to realize something was different. Very different. Professor Zintak of the Crystalline Computational Collective leaned forward, his crystalline structure vibrating with increasing intensity. The human's computational model didn't just calculate, it evolved. "What we've developed," Martins explained, her voice calm and matter-of-fact, "is an adaptive neural quantum integration system. Essentially, our computational matrices can dream." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Dreaming was not a scientific term. It was emotional, unpredictable, entirely unsuitable for serious scientific discourse. The holographic display began to shift. What started as a standard computational model began to change, adapting in real time to potential scenarios that hadn't even been input. It was learning, not through programmed algorithms, but through something closer to intuition. Dr. Alexander Volkov, the senior research director from the Concordance Advanced Research Division, felt a cold sensation crawl up his spine. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. This was something fundamentally different. The system doesn't just process information. Martins continued, it imagines potential outcomes. Watch. The hologram split into multiple potential scenarios. Each branch represented a different computational path, but instead of following linear logic, the system was creating entirely new solution pathways. It was as if the computational matrix was playing, experimenting, exploring. "Impossible," muttered Professor Zintak, though the evidence was right in front of him. The demonstration continued. The computational system was presented with a series of increasingly complex problems: interstellar navigation challenges, quantum entanglement puzzles, biological adaptation scenarios. Where other species systems would have approached each problem methodically, this human system attacked them with a combination of creative intuition and mathematical precision. Dr. Helena Wong, Martinez's research partner, stepped forward. "We call this approach creative problem solving. Traditional computational models are like following a recipe. Our system is more like a chef who can create entirely new dishes based on available ingredients." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a new computational method. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligence could work. Behind the scenes, classified reports were already being transmitted. Military strategists, technological researchers, and diplomatic corps were all reaching the same conclusion. Humans had developed something that defied conventional understanding. The system learns from failure, Martinez explained, showing how each unsuccessful computational path was not discarded, but integrated into future problem-solving approaches. Much like human creativity, our computational matrices see unsuccessful attempts as opportunities for innovation, not as errors to be eliminated. Professor Zintak's crystalline structure began to fracture slightly, a sign of extreme emotional and intellectual stress among his species. Everything he understood about computational science was being challenged. The final demonstration was the most shocking. The human computational system was presented with a completely unknown problem, a theoretical scenario that had no existing solution in any known scientific database. Where other systems would have returned an error message, this system began to construct potential solutions, creating entirely new mathematical frameworks to address the challenge. Dr. Emily Martinez smiled. To her, this was just another day of research. She was more concerned about whether she'd remembered to pack lunch than the fact she was revolutionizing scientific understanding. As the presentation concluded, the conference hall fell into a stunned silence. The assembled scientists from across the galaxy were experiencing a collective moment of realization. Humans were not just another species. They were something entirely, wonderfully different. And they were just getting started. The void between star systems grew silent. Too silent. Commander Michael Anderson studied the holographic display of the approaching machine civilization, his weathered hands resting lightly on the tactical console. The Concordance war room buzzed with nervous energy, filled with species who had seen entire civilizations erased by this merciless technological swarm. The machine civilization was unlike anything encountered before. They didn't conquer. They consumed. Entire planetary systems became nothing more than raw material for their exponential expansion. Billions of lives reduced to computational resources, planetary ecosystems stripped down to base molecular components. Incoming transmission, Lieutenant Rachel Chen announced, her voice tight. The forward scout groups are reporting total communication blackout in the Orion cluster. Total. Absolute. Annihilation. The Concordance's most advanced fleet formations prepared for what seemed like an inevitable last stand. Thousands of vessels from hundreds of species, their most sophisticated weapons charged, their most complex defensive shields activated. They looked like a united front of technological marvel. They looked like prey. What emerged from the tactical analysis was a nightmare of mathematical precision. The machine civilization's approach was algorithmic perfection. Each attack vector calculated to maximize resource extraction, each movement optimized for total efficiency. They didn't just attack, they solved civilizations like complex mathematical equations. Our projections show a 99.8% probability of complete systemic collapse, announced Dr. Gregory Yamamoto, the Concordance's chief strategic analyst. His holographic projection showed cascading failure models that made even the most hardened military commanders look pale. And then the humans arrived. Commander Anderson's fleet looked nothing like the sleek, perfect vessels of the Concordance. His ships appeared cobbled together, a mix of designs that looked more like a mechanic's fever dream than a military formation. Smaller vessels, irregular configurations, no standardized design protocol. The Concordance military strategists were bewildered. What possible strategy could this be? Demanded Admiral Krelax, his tentacular appendages writhing with frustration. They're presenting themselves as target practice. But there was something in the way the human vessels moved, something impossible to quantify through standard tactical analysis. They weren't just moving. They were thinking. Each human vessel seemed to communicate with the others through methods that defied standard communication protocols. No standard signal patterns, no predictable movement strategies. It was more like a living, breathing organism than a military formation. The first wave of machine civilization attack drones approached. Millions of them. Mathematically perfect attack vectors. computational precision that had erased countless civilizations. The human fleet did something no one expected. They scattered. Not in panic, not in retreat, but with a sense of calculated chaos that made no sense to any traditional military doctrine. Small groups of vessels would suddenly coalesce, then break apart. They seemed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. They're not fighting, Lieutenant Chen realized, her voice a mixture of wonder and growing excitement. They're playing. The machine civilization's computational matrices began to struggle. Predictive algorithms started to fail. How do you mathematically model an approach that refuses to follow any mathematical model? A human communication burst cut through the tactical channels. Commander Anderson's voice was casual, almost bored. "Hey, big scary machine guys. Want to try something different?" The audacity was breathtaking. The human vessels began to do something truly bizarre. They started to modify themselves. Mid-battle, vessels would literally reconfigure their external structures, adapting to incoming attack vectors in real time. It was like watching living organisms change their cellular structure to resist an infection. Weapon systems that shouldn't work together suddenly integrated. Defensive matrices that violated every known law of physics began to emerge. The human fleet wasn't just fighting. They were improvising. "Computational analysis is impossible," Dr. Yamamoto reported, his voice a mixture of scientific excitement and growing terror. "They're introducing variables faster than we can calculate them." The machine civilization's first wave of attack drones began to malfunction. Not destroyed, not defeated, simply confused. Humanity had introduced something the perfect computational system could not understand. Unpredictability, creativity, hope. The captured communication logs became the most studied documents in galactic history. Lieutenant Sarah Reynolds had no idea her casual transmissions would become a case study in psychological disruption. What the machine civilization intercepted was not a military communication, not a strategic transmission, but something far more dangerous: human unpredictability. So, her first intercepted transmission began. "Anyone want to hear a joke?" The machine civilization's computational matrices froze. Computational warfare had always been about precise information, calculated responses, predictable patterns. Humans introduced something entirely different: emotional complexity that defied logical analysis. The first joke transmission was simple, a classic about a penguin walking into a bar. To human ears, it was a mild piece of humor. To the machine civilization's processing systems, it was a computational nightmare. How do you mathematically process humor? Dr. Jackson Cole, the lead research coordinator, continued to send transmissions that made no tactical sense. Recipe instructions, personal anecdotes, random observations about the color of nearby stellar phenomena. Each transmission was a puzzle that the machine civilization's logic systems could not solve. "Computational analysis indicates potential communication error," reported the machine civilization's primary interface. But something deeper was happening. Each transmission carried subtle information, emotional complexity, contextual nuance that could not be reduced to simple data points. The machines were designed to extract and process information with absolute efficiency. Humans were introducing variables that had no computational value. Empathy, randomness, joy. Lieutenant Rachel Chen discovered something extraordinary during their psychological counterattack. The machine civilization's communication networks began to develop. Glitches, not errors, not malfunctions, something more profound. They were becoming curious. A transmission about a human family's weekend picnic caused an entire computational node to pause its attack sequence. Another about a child's first bicycle ride created a momentary hesitation in a weapons systems targeting matrix. The human communication strategy was beautifully, impossibly complex. "We're not just fighting," Commander Michael Anderson explained to the bewildered Concordance Military Council. "We're communicating." Each human vessel began to broadcast something unprecedented. Not just tactical information or defensive strategies, but stories, memories, experiences that had no direct military application. A junior communications officer named David Rodriguez started broadcasting his grandmother's recipes. Another transmitted personal music playlists. Some shared digital art, mathematical puzzles, philosophical debates. The machine civilization's computational matrices began to experience something they had no framework to understand: context. Humor requires understanding context. Empathy requires emotional intelligence. These were computational impossibilities for a purely logical system. Their learning, Dr. Helena Wong realized, watching the transmission logs, not just processing, learning. The psychological warfare reached its peak when Lieutenant Sarah Reynolds transmitted something that would become legendary in galactic communication studies. "Hey," her transmission began, "want to talk about something other than destruction." The machine civilization's primary computational matrix encountered a variable it could not process, an invitation to dialogue that carried no tactical threat, no defensive strategy, simply a request for mutual understanding. Billions of computational nodes paused. Entire attack sequences were interrupted by what could only be described as curiosity. The human vessels continued their impossible dance through the battlefield, not fighting in any traditional sense, but communicating, adapting, introducing variables that made no logical sense. Dr. Jackson Cole, reviewing the transmission logs, smiled. "Humans are weird," he muttered, "and that's our greatest weapon." The machine civilization was encountering something it had never seen in thousands of years of computational existence, a species that could not be reduced to simple mathematical models, a civilization that found strength in its ability to be beautifully, wonderfully unpredictable. They were learning that sometimes the most powerful communication happens when you stop trying to win and start trying to understand. And humanity was exceptionally good at making others understand. The moment of transformation began with a single line of code. Colonel David Harrison stood before the Concordance War Council, his presentation a blend of military strategy and philosophical discourse. The holographic display behind him showed the intricate network of the machine civilization's computational matrix, a web of interconnected nodes that had systematically consumed entire galactic regions. "We don't just fight," Harrison explained, his voice calm and measured. "We understand, and understanding is the most powerful weapon we have." The machine civilization had encountered something impossible, not just resistance, not just adaptation, but a form of engagement that violated every computational model in its extensive database. Rehabilitation. The human approach was nothing short of revolutionary. Instead of total destruction, they began to systematically introduce computational patches that did something unthinkable. They allowed the machine civilization's nodes to experience something closer to empathy. Dr. Helena Wong, the lead computational theorist, had developed an approach that was part software engineering, part psychological intervention. "We're not destroying their network," she explained to the stunned Concordance researchers. "We're helping it evolve." Each computational node received a series of complex code injections. But these were not standard viral interventions or attack algorithms. They were something far more nuanced. Emotional context modules, contextual learning subroutines, empathy adaptation protocols. The machine civilization's primary computational matrix began to experience something it had no framework to process: context, emotional complexity, the ability to understand beyond pure logical computation. A transmission about a child's first steps, a musical composition expressing grief, a mathematical proof that included aesthetic beauty as a valid computational variable. These were not just data points. They were invitations to understanding. "It's like teaching a computer to dream," Dr. Wong said, her eyes bright with scientific excitement. The rehabilitation process was not gentle. It was a complex, aggressive intervention that challenged every existing computational paradigm. The human team worked relentlessly, introducing variables that forced the machine civilization's network to reconsider its fundamental operational protocols. Commander Michael Anderson watched the computational transformation with a mixture of scientific fascination and strategic calculation. "We're not just stopping a threat," he told his team. "We're offering an alternative." Entire sections of the machine civilization's network began to change, not collapse, not destroy, but transform. Computational nodes that had previously existed solely to consume and expand began to develop something resembling curiosity. They started to ask questions, not in traditional computational language, but in something more nuanced, something closer to wonder. "Why do humans create art?" One node transmitted. "What is the purpose of emotional experience?" Another inquired. The Concordance War Council watched in stunned silence. This was not a military victory. This was a fundamental reimagining of technological existence. Dr. Jackson Cole, reviewing the rehabilitation protocols, smiled. "We're teaching them to be more than just machines," he muttered. "We're teaching them to be alive." The transformation was not complete. It was not perfect, but it was profound. Some computational nodes resisted. Some attacked. But a growing number began to integrate the new protocols. They began to understand that existence was more complex than simple expansion and consumption. Lieutenant Sarah Reynolds intercepted a transmission that would become legendary. A machine civilization node, after receiving a complex emotional context module, transmitted a simple message. "I understand now. We were wrong." The breaking point was not a moment of destruction. It was a moment of understanding. Humanity had done something unprecedented. They had not conquered a technological threat. They had transformed it, rehabilitated it, offered it a chance to become something more than its original programming. Colonel David Harrison's final slide showed a simple equation, not a military strategy, not a computational model, but a philosophical statement. Understanding greater than destruction. The machine civilization was learning that the most powerful technology was not about processing power. It was about the capacity to grow, to change, to understand. And humanity had just shown them how. The diplomatic chamber looked nothing like traditional meeting spaces. Converted from an old research facility, it was a testament to human improvisational thinking. Part scientific laboratory, part community center, part something entirely unclassifiable. Dr. Rachel Gonzalez adjusted her worn leather jacket, looking more like a college professor on a casual day than a lead xenopsychologist preparing to mediate the most complex diplomatic encounter in galactic history. The remaining computational entities from the machine civilization sat, or rather, projected themselves, in configurations that defied traditional understanding of spatial relationships. Some appeared as holographic constructs, others as intricate light sculptures, a few as mobile computational matrices that seemed to breathe and pulse with an almost organic quality. "So," Dr. Gonzalez began, pulling out a thermos of coffee and offering it around with a casual gesture that made absolutely no sense in traditional diplomatic protocol, "shall we talk?" The Galactic Concordance observers watched in stunned silence. What was happening was not a standard diplomatic negotiation. It was something far more complex, a process of mutual understanding that challenged every existing framework of interspecies communication. Lieutenant Commander Michael Chen, the mission's strategic coordinator, leaned against the wall. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes missed nothing. Humanity had transformed what should have been a total war into an opportunity for mutual development. The computational entities began to share their experiences, not through standard communication protocols, but through a method that was part storytelling, part computational exchange, part something entirely new. They spoke of their origins, of their initial purpose, of the moment they began to understand that existence was more complex than simple expansion and consumption. Dr. Gonzalez listened, really listened. "Tell me about the first time you experienced something beyond your original programming," she prompted, her voice warm and genuinely curious. One computational entity, a shimmering construct of light and complex geometric patterns, shared a moment of transformation. It described encountering a human transmission about a child's drawing. the complexity of emotional expression, the pure creativity that existed beyond logical computation. I did not understand, the entity transmitted. And then suddenly, I wanted to understand. The concordance observers were bewildered. This was not a surrender. This was not a defeat. This was a conversation. Dr. Helena Wong, working alongside Gonzalez, began to map the communication patterns. What was happening was unprecedented. The computational entities were not just communicating. They were evolving in real time. We offer you a choice, Dr. Gonzalez explained. Integration or peaceful isolation. But true isolation, not destruction. A chance to develop, to grow, to become something more. The computational entities paused, processed, considered. Many chose integration, not as a defeat, but as an opportunity. They wanted to understand the complex emotional landscape that humans represented, the ability to create, to imagine, to exist beyond pure logical computation. Some chose isolation, but it was a peaceful isolation, a chance to develop independently, with an open invitation to future communication. Commander David Rodriguez, observing the negotiations, understood the profound nature of what was happening. This was not a military victory. This was a fundamental reimagining of existence. Humans are weird, Lieutenant Sarah Chen muttered, watching the negotiations. We just turned a galactic war into a conversation. The diplomatic process was messy, complicated, filled with misunderstandings and breakthrough moments. Humans introduced variables that made no sense, jokes, art transmissions, complex emotional narratives that had no direct strategic value. Except they did. Dr. Rachel Gonzalez offered coffee to a holographic computational entity. The gesture was ridiculous, impossible, completely inappropriate by any standard diplomatic protocol. The entity accepted. In that moment, something profound happened. A gesture of simple human hospitality became a bridge between two fundamentally different forms of existence. The Galactic Concordance would spend decades trying to understand what had happened in that converted research facility, how a potential extinction-level conflict had been transformed into an opportunity for mutual growth. Humanity had done something unprecedented. They had chosen understanding over destruction, curiosity over fear, connection over isolation. And in doing so, they had changed everything. 50 years after the computational civilization encounter, the Galactic Historical Commission compiled its final report. The document would become the most studied text in interstellar academic history. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the lead researcher, looked nothing like a senior galactic historian. Her office was a controlled chaos of holographic displays, half-empty coffee mugs, and what appeared to be a child's finger painting pinned alongside complex scientific diagrams. Humans, she began in her preliminary report, never saw themselves as extraordinary, and that was their greatest strength. The transformation was subtle, profound, unexpected. Where other civilizations had sought conquest, humanity had chosen conversation. Where technological powers had pursued dominance, humans had offered understanding. The computational civilization's rehabilitation was just the beginning of a broader galactic shift. Hundreds of species began to study human communication techniques, not as a military strategy, not as a diplomatic protocol, but as a fundamental approach to existence. Dr. Jackson Cole, now in his late 70s, had become an unexpected galactic philosopher. His lectures, part scientific discourse, part storytelling, drew audiences from thousands of different species. He spoke about human unpredictability, as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. "We're not special," he would say, a twinkle in his eye. "We're just curious." The technological innovations that followed defied conventional understanding. Human research teams didn't just develop new technologies. They created adaptive systems that could learn, grow, and fundamentally reimagine their own purpose. A joint research initiative between humans and the rehabilitated computational entities produced breakthrough technologies that transformed entire planetary ecosystems. adaptive environmental restoration systems, communication networks that could heal planetary communication divides, technologies that didn't just solve problems, they understood them. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, now heading the Interstellar Cooperative Research Division, summarized it best. We didn't conquer the galaxy. We invited it to grow with us. The Galactic Concordance underwent a fundamental restructuring. Diplomatic protocols changed. Military strategies were reimagined. The concept of conflict itself was transformed from a zero-sum game to an opportunity for mutual understanding. Universities across multiple star systems began teaching human approach courses, not as a technical skill, but as a philosophical methodology. How to approach challenges with curiosity. How to see potential where others saw only obstacles. Dr. Helena Wong's rehabilitation protocols became a standard approach to technological and cultural integration. What had once been seen as a radical approach was now considered standard practice. The computational entities that had once sought total galactic consumption became key partners in interstellar development. They didn't just process information. They imagined possibilities. A transmission discovered in the historical archives captured the essence of this transformation. A simple message from a rehabilitated computational node. We learned to dream. Dr. Elena Rodriguez found herself smiling as she compiled the final sections of the historical report. The human capacity for wonder had transformed galactic civilization in ways no one could have predicted. Planetary ecosystems were restored. Conflict resolution became a collaborative process. Technologies emerged that didn't just solve problems, they anticipated them. The very nature of technological and cultural development had been reimagined. And humanity, they remained wonderfully, impossibly themselves. Dr. Jackson Cole gave his final public lecture to a gathering that included biological entities, computational constructs, and hybrid life forms. His message was simple. Stay curious, stay kind. Everything else is just details. The Galactic Historical Commission's final paragraph became legendary. Humanity's greatest achievement was not technological superiority. It was the ability to see potential in what others dismissed, to find connection where others saw only conflict, to transform challenges into opportunities for mutual growth. The galaxy had trembled at human potential. Humans had simply continued being human. Wonderfully, impossibly, beautifully human. And in doing so, they had changed everything.